Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. Here it is Monday, the 14th of November, 2022, and it is just about over. Drop me out for a second. Yeah, that's the title. It's just about over. Hurricane season coming to an end. It's 183 days long. We are in the waning days now. November 30th, that'll be the last day. Not much happening out there, of course. Finally, in the wake of Hurricane Nicole, we'll take a look at some wind data that we collected down there in southeast Florida. Plus that map there, the inset map from Brian McNulty, a look back at the hurricane season and what we have had so far. Not living up to the expectations set forth early in the season with this gigantic ACE score that was forecast, especially by the European and its seasonal guidance. But we have had a very impactful season. I think we all know that. And then we'll end today's update with a look at the potential for some significant lake effect snows this weekend as cold air pours across the warmer than average Great Lakes of the eastern United States. All right, there's my setup. Let's get going. First, our interactive map. I bring this up because we set a weather station up right there for the arrival of Hurricane Nicole. One of my colleagues from Orlando, Mike, helped me out with that the night before, I think it was, something like that. The days and nights all run together when you do these field missions, believe me. This is what it looks like. This is a snap from the camera system that we mount that looks at the weather station. We found that that is both a great way to monitor what happens, if anything goes wrong, if anybody messes with it, and it's just really neat to see this thing in action. This is just a still image of it, and as you can see, we clamp it right to the Jersey wall. This orange thing here is a DOT. I mean, there's a company that makes these, and the DOT uses them. These clamps are called barrier busters, or I mean, whatever. There's different names for them, I'm sure. And they normally hold signs, but as you can see, we have retrofitted it where we have bolted our Pelican case, have the mast on there. It's about 40 inches tall, and then there's the R.M. Young anemometer. So what did it record? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here it is. A couple of wind gusts there. These reds are the wind gusts, the peak gusts. This one is 75 miles per hour. This one is 78. Everything else under that threshold in terms of our peak gusts. And there's a few interesting things to point out in this data. The blues are our 1 minute average winds. So there's all these different plots there. A couple of interesting things. Note early on in the first half, the eye came pretty close, maybe even brushing right over where our weather station was, the northeast part of the eye, as Nicole kind of wobbled in. Remember, it had a very large eye. And so we did have a little bit of a minimum there in the wind data that would suggest that it had somewhat of an eye passage. But notice, if you will, that this area all through here, there's a lot of noise, so to speak, where everything kind of runs together. There's a lot of instances where you have some blues that are higher, your gusts are lower. They're kind of mixed. Whereas on the back side, there's a separation. See that, all that white space in there? I think that is very interesting, and I want to dig into the radar data later and kind of understand why do we have all of this sort of dead space in here where there's more of a clustering. Everything is much more, I guess, uniform for the sustained winds. Your gusts are still a little dispersed over a large area, but the front side of Nicole, especially up here, a lot of these observations are scattered out over a large range. So some of your peak winds are 50, some of them are in the 70s. I just think that's interesting. That's why, or one of the reasons why, we put these anemometers out there. Now, just a real quick piece of history for you. We've been doing this since 2001, and our programmer, my best friend from childhood days, his name's Jason. He now works for SAS up in Cary, North Carolina, a statistical analysis company. SAS software, some of you might know it. And we've been working on this for a long, long time. And back for Ian, a few weeks ago, right? 6-8 weeks ago, whatever it was now, we tried to do 1 second data, but it overwhelmed our system. It was too much, and some of our stuff crashed, and it was not reliable. So we reverted back to 1 minute data, where the Raspberry Pi computer collects that data on the computer every second, and then it takes those 60 observations, divides them by 60, you get your 1 minute average, and then it just finds the peak gust during that 60 observation period, and it plots it and stores it in a table and whatever. So it's working really well. We're really happy with it. We have 4 of these weather stations. We're going to continue to do testing with them. We also collect air pressure, but the air pressure for this This weather station back on that map there, this was not in the center of the eye. That's where the weather station was. The center of the eye came in farther to the south down here, and so I'm not really too concerned with the air pressure at Melbourne. We did record it, but for today's purposes, I wanted to show you these different plots. We also have it in the table. This is just what that table looks like, and you can see there's that one gust there, 53 miles per hour, 53 and a half, 1 minute average, and that's getting it. You got to realize that's 53 and a half miles per hour was your 1 minute average at 2:29 a.m. there, and then your 78 mile per hour wind is your peak gust for that 1 minute. And there's other observations around. This is what it looks like again in the table that we have, and then Jason pulls all that data down and we can plot it. Other people on our server and on our Patreon team also do this as well. We make the data available on the back end, and then we put these charts and graphs out. We share them on social media. All right, so there you go. Just a little bit of a look at our data from Hurricane Nicole. Now, what about the season as a whole? Well, this tweet here from Brian McNulty this morning, the updated seasonal track map shows all 16 tropical cyclones. We had 2 depressions that never formed, right, and into tropical storms. And so, out of those 16 TCs, tropical cyclones, 14 became named storms, 8 of those became bona fide hurricanes, and then 2 of those became major hurricanes. Now, this more or less fell short of the dire predictions early on. All of the available climate model guidance was very, very aggressive with us having a very, very busy hurricane season. Maybe a top 5% type season. It didn't happen that way in terms of the overall numbers. What numbers, though? What numbers? Are we just talking about, I mean, really, it matters. If we're talking about just named storms and ACE, yes, the season fell short. If we're talking about damage and impact and loss of life, it was a very, very active and destructive season. Looking at Fiona, of course, Ian, Nicole recently, and then Lisa down there in Belize, and then other activity in the Eastern Pacific. This was a very, very active season in terms of people, dollars amount, lives, dollars amount, dollar amounts, and lives lost. And of course, we would like to get the lives lost to 0. Maybe we'll get there one day, but it was a very busy season in terms of the damage, the residual impacts over the next 10, 20 years for people, especially in Florida. And Nicole, you know, that was a very impactful hurricane for the east coast of Florida. Some of those condos down there, they're going to have to be probably demolished. I don't know how they're going to fix some of those. This is what it looks like, by the way, if we expand the map. Really appreciate Brian putting this out on Twitter. Notice a lack of activity in the main development region owed to the fact that we had a very different pattern this year than the climate models were suggesting. We had a lot of activity in the western part of the basin. Most of the ACE was over here. So the ACE that we did have, the ACE count close to, I think it's close to 100 roughly. It's in the upper 90s if I'm not mistaken. Normally we'd have an ACE of about 116 or so. It just depends on which period of time you look at for the base state. But most of the ACE points that were generated, and these different color codes here show you, were all west of 50 degrees longitude. We had no major hurricanes in the deep tropics this year, and that's very, very telling about how different the hurricane season was versus what was expected. So the energy that was output was close to land. You know, this one went up, and that energy, even though it was post-tropical, really impacted Nova Scotia there with the remnants of Fiona. So a very impactful season, even though it didn't quite live up to the numbers that were forecast, showing, hopefully once and for all, that the numbers don't matter. It's the impacts that really, really matter. We've got to focus on that more, myself included. I was certainly swept up in the likelihood that this would be a very, very busy season. We were prepared for it. And it turns out it was only a backloaded handful of storms that really made the difference here this year, August being a big shutout, as you remember. All right, moving on ahead here, we'll talk about the season as a whole in a wrap-up edition of this update on November 30th. For now, though, yes, nice and clear out there. One little tropical wave sitting right in here. Strong upper-level winds, very prevalent across the deep tropics, as you can clearly see by these high-moving and these fast-moving high cirrus clouds. No energy consolidating over here in the Western Caribbean, Southwest Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico region. We are, for all intents and purposes, done. And you can see that reflected very nicely on the vorticity signature. Just a little piece of energy sitting way down here. All these little areas of green, very low amounts of vorticity or energy. One little pocket here in the Northeast Gulf, part of just a small surface trough up there. Something like that. Nothing really concentrated at all, and that's what you would expect this time of year. We're starting to develop more mid-latitude systems with the energy up here out of the tropics, and that's the way things will evolve over the next several months, and we'll start checking in next spring and summer. You know how it goes. Now, speaking of spring and summer and looking ahead a little bit to next year and even the off-season coming up, what are the parameters that we currently have in place now? And this is very interesting. We still have the La Nina here in the Pacific. And we'll talk about this more again on my November 30th sort of wrap-up version of this update. I'll go into great detail on what we learned, where we failed on some things, and then a look ahead to next year. And this will be something that we watch closely, the state of the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon, or the ENSO. Right now, yes, we are still in La Nina, but looking at some of the guidance, is the guidance still any good? I mean, look at what the guidance said about the hurricane season. Anyway, it's always interesting, isn't it? That being said, the guidance does suggest we will lose the La Nina, transition towards a more warm ENSO state, and maybe even an El Nino by sometime next year. We've been in a La Nina for a while now, and it has been since 2015 that we have had a bona fide El Nino, the abnormal warming of this area here through the Pacific, where this is not blue, it's orange and red and so forth. We haven't had that in quite a while. But the Atlantic, all of it here, that's really remarkable. All of the Atlantic basin, especially the high latitudes up here, still running well above the long-term average. Does that hold into next hurricane season? And even with a weak La Nina, assuming we get one, we could still have a very impactful season. And I think we learned that this year. Again, it kind of doesn't matter the numbers, it matters the pattern, the setup, and where what does happen to form ends up. Is it a big population center? Is it open land somewhere with a sparsely populated area? Or are these systems just out over the open ocean, only of interest to maritime? We never say fish storm. I don't say that anymore. Fish don't live on the top of the ocean. Some of them breach the surface, those flying fish, and whales, which aren't fish, those breach the surface too. But come on. They're not fish storms. They are maritime storms. We should just call them that. Because there are shipping lanes out there, and boy, they want to avoid tropical activity as well as big extratropical storms too. The cruise ships, you name it. There's a lot of traffic out there, even if these don't hit land. So this is an interesting pattern ending the season, and that could make for a very active winter storm season here for the Northeast U.S. when we do get cold intrusions and a blending of the subtropical jet through here, the northern jet coming in, maybe a couple of big doozy nor'easters up here. We shall see. Water temperatures would certainly allow. Look at that. They're like off the scale warmer than average. Ridiculous. So we'll see. All right, speaking of that, they are warmer than average, but that's still a little cold for me. 13, 14 degrees Celsius. Cooling off, but still well above normal. Your Gulf Stream is down here, where you still have 26 Celsius, 27 even here off the Carolinas. So yeah, there's still plenty of warm water out there. And again, that'll make for an interesting winter storm season for sure. Gulf of Mexico. Now listen, I'm going to be watching this very closely, as I always do, but even more closely this coming off season, because the Gulf has been where almost all of our big-time ace-producing events of the last 5 to 6 years have been, most of them. Irma and Matthew notwithstanding, and Maria too, but really for landfalls along the U.S., Irma, again, was a different one that came from a Cape Verde system, but you think about Harvey, you think about Laura and Ida, and of course recently with Ian, we had Michael in 2018, big time impacts, big ace producers, intense, rapidly intensifying before landfall, Zeta in 2020 as well. That's because the Gulf has been well warmer than it should be. And that seems to be a theme here that we have seen over the last several years. And so it's very important because the Gulf is not really tied to INSO. In other words, whether or not we have a strong El Nino or a La Nina, the Gulf just does what it does. The INSO correlation to the Gulf is practically zero. And I think an interview with Dr. Klotzbach about that sometime would be very helpful, explaining how INSO affects different parts of the basin. But the Gulf, warmer than average as we end the season, and we're going to watch and see how does that hold. Do we get these strong polar fronts dipping all the way down with a lot of cold air advection, the air rushing over laterally or horizontally, mixing everything up? Or do we have a big fat ridge out over the southwest Atlantic this year, or the Gulf itself, kind of keeping things stagnant, unmixed, and it just gradually cools off with the loss of incoming solar radiation, and then warms back up again once we get to the spring and the sun angle gets higher? Very interesting, because we've had this stretch of major landfall after major landfall in the Gulf of Mexico, and that's very important as we go into next hurricane season, next spring severe weather season. That warm air, moist air gets transported north ahead of these fronts in March, April, and May, and a warmer than average Gulf could help to fuel the Dixie Alley tornado threat, certainly Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, that vicinity, and then Tornado Alley proper. So the Gulf really does matter more than just hurricane season, and as you can see, it is all running above average with just 2 weeks to go in the season, so that's something we'll watch very closely. All right, not often do I get to show the GFS all the way out to 2 weeks because, you know, it's not reliable beyond really 5 days, and then there's a big argument. I know people love the GFS Euro dual, and, you know, even within 5 days it has its flaws. All the models do. The point is, today, I'm going to show you the next 2 weeks because it's kind of cool. 384 hours out ends on November 30th. And I just thought, why not? There's nothing big coming, nothing where we have to say, well, that's way out at 12 days. Why are you showing that? It's very innocuous and benign, so I figured, what the heck? So let's do it. That's 12. There's 24. There's 48. You get the idea. There's 3 days, 4 days. And just to show you what we're looking for, there's nothing out here. Nothing down in the deep tropics. Nothing in the Caribbean or Gulf, nothing in the Western Atlantic, no vorticity, no areas of these oranges like this big mid-latitude storm. None of that down here. There's nothing consolidating as we move through time. So that's what we're looking for. There's day 5 right there. Now this is interesting. There's a little bit of an impulse in the Bay of Campeche by 120 hours out. Another piece of energy here north of Central America, Costa Rica, and Panama. Come on, Mark, wake up. And a small little area right there to watch. Just small little features. You never know. Maybe something's trying to come in there and make some noise right before things are all said and done. We'll watch them. There's day 6, day 7 right there. Finally 8, 9, 10. There's day 10 there. Nope, by day 10, not much out there to worry about. By the way, there's that ridge I was talking about. If we get that set up over a good deal of the winter, that'll keep the Gulf full of warm, moist flow out of the Caribbean, and it won't mix things up. It's when you get these northerly winds coming down this way that things really get mixed up in the Gulf of Mexico. So I'll be watching that, by the way, over the coming months. Anyhow, moving on out through the time frame, we're at November 26th and then beyond, finally ending at 384 hours. The last day of hurricane season, Wednesday, November 30th, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. A pretty large surface low here, probably. At least the GFS has it. Yeah, is that going to happen 2 weeks out? Who knows? Same thing applies to winter-type storms that we do apply to hurricanes. Anything beyond 5 days, you just say, look, it's something I'll watch out for. But the point is, at least we can look out 2 weeks and say, okay, good, nothing of any significance. Now, look, that doesn't mean something won't sneak in there. A little impulse gets into the right area of favorability with those very warm water temperatures. We certainly could have development, but at least for now, the GFS operational, one little snapshot in time here over the next 2 weeks, nothing to be concerned with as we wrap up the hurricane season. Now, in the off season, I do, and we do as a community here, our crowdfunded project, our group of people that follow on Twitter, on YouTube, and Facebook, etc., the social media world, our HurricaneTrack family, and then I'm sort of the head of it, right? we do cover off-season events. And why? Well, again, I really enjoy doing it. I think it's exciting. We also have the capability with all the equipment that we use, and it keeps us in practice. We even test new technology that we might want to use in an upcoming hurricane season in winter storms, especially the big nor'easters, your coastal storms, and then spring severe weather gives us the opportunity in the spring to do that, and then the desert monsoon in the summer months. And then, before you know it, it's hurricane season again. So that being said, I think it's the third time I've said that today. What are we looking at? Well, you folks up here in the lakes, Buffalo, roughly right there, right? The Syracuse area, trying to remember the outline of everything, Syracuse, and up towards Watertown. In this area, off of Ontario, this is Erie, and watch what happens. The storm's going to come through over the next few days, and we're going to get this push of wind that's very favorable across those lakes, sort of a west-northwest to west-southwest, just depending on the trajectory. The flow is going to be ideal of cold air going across these warmer lake waters up here, so that the lake effect snow machine is going to crank up Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, even through next Monday. This is about 5 days out. Those are your plumes. That's it. That's kind of a west-southwesterly flow right across those lakes, depositing in a very moist air mass there with cold air coming across the top. You bet. A massive lake effect event coming up. And you guys better be ready for it, because the temperatures are only going to be like in the low 30s or so. So they're going to be these fat, accumulating heavy wet snows. Buffalo, Syracuse, maybe Oswego, up towards Watertown along the Tug Hill region. The I-81 corridor, I know it well. I've been up there 2 or 3 times in my career, really the last few years here. A very fascinating event. The water temperatures in the lakes basically in the 50s right now, so there's a lot of moisture available. I don't know if I'm going to go up and cover this particular event. One of the reasons I'm leaving tomorrow to go down to Florida again, I know, right? Because hopefully, fingers crossed, NASA will launch Artemis 1, finally getting that off the ground after delays and more delays, and Hurricane Nicole and Ian delaying things. Finally, hopefully tomorrow night, 1:04 a.m. roughly, Wednesday morning, hopefully that big rocket lifts off from Canaveral, and I want to be there for it. Several of my colleagues are going with me. We're geeks. We love this stuff. We're into science and rockets and weather and whatever. It's all good. So anyway, I just don't know if I'm going to have time to do that and then drive all the way up to the Great Lakes. We shall see. But I figured, look, there will be more lake effect snow. But for you folks up there, just in case you're not paying attention, now's the time to do so. Some very heavy wet snow coming up. I will certainly be tweeting about it and certainly retweeting people like Ben Knoll and the Weather Service up there in Buffalo, just to make sure you folks up there in that region are well aware. And then if I don't go up for this one, believe you me, I'll be up there for some additional big-time lake effect snows coming as the winter gets here. It's not even winter yet. It's still fall, for goodness sakes. All right, I'm just about done. My update is just about over, so I'll get this online for you. As always, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, please do like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And if you do subscribe, you are a subscriber. Very important. Hit the notification bell so you get notified if you want to. I hope you do. That's really important. Hit that notification button, and YouTube will tell you HurricaneTrack has uploaded a new video, or we went live, or whatever the case may be. All right? All right, you guys have a great rest of your Monday. Always, thank you for giving me a piece of your day, a part of your time there. I appreciate it very much. I'm Mark Suttle for HurricaneTrack. I'll be back with you later in the week.